I'm going to be sort of rerunning a presentation I've given previously, and I don't even have the presentation software, so you're going to have to bear with me a bit. I've already spoken about Carolyn Cernich, Kevin Collins. Tom Pinto is with the District Attorney's Office, and he's also been really active. And Lori Grace has both made connections for us and also provided money so that this time our scanners, the people who come in and actually do the physical scanning, were able to be paid because our election this time was a 2-page ballot, and that was going to double our workload, and we were really worried about being able to get it done before certification. And so for the first time, some of the people who did the scanning were able to be paid, and so we're very grateful to Lori for that.
And the costs were a lot less than doubled, dramatically less.
Yeah. So let's talk about what the Transparency Project is about for just a moment. The first principle that we'd really like to see enshrined in law is that ballots, we all agree, they need to be cast in secret. But once ballots are cast in secret, ballots should be public documents, and it should be possible for anyone who wants to count them. Now, there may be logistical problems with people coming into the office and physically picking up and counting every ballot, but to the extent that it's possible, the principle should be that ballots are public documents countable by anyone. There are a number of states where that's now clear law, and I'm hoping that we'll move to making that clear law in California as well. Deborah Bowen has been great in terms of election integrity in this state, at some expense to her popularity with some registrars. But you know, she was incredibly gutsy to order a top-to-bottom review of all the election equipment used in the state. And after a number of registrars had already bought equipment, I believe the ATM-style equipment that I don't know how anyone can trust, she forced them basically to insist that they not use equipment that didn't leave what's called a voter verifiable paper audit trail. So ballots should be public documents. Well, how do you make them public if you can't allow everyone into the room? You can scan them. That's one approach. If you're using common off-the-shelf scanning equipment, then you can be reasonably certain that nothing evil is happening behind the scenes. Now, you can't be 100% certain, because as computers get fast, I mean, a scanner is basically a computer as well. So it is, in theory, possible that the scanner would be altering things. So you want, at the very least, to do a spot check and compare the documents that you've scanned with the paper documents that are still out there. And we've been doing that. I don't know the statistics of how many you'd have to check, but basically, once we have the scans from a batch on a physical DVD that can no longer be altered, we'll go back and check images on that DVD, a couple, against the original paper documents, just as a matter of best practices, not because we really think our scanner is fooling us. So scanning ballots is the approach that we're using to enable redundant counting. The scans, we made the first few sets of scans available on the internet, and lately, with this last election, it's just so much data that it's available on DVD to anyone who bothers to write Carolyn. And you know, that to me is equivalent. If somebody is that interested, then they can actually ask for the DVDs, and they'll get a copy. Now, that's really where the Transparency Project's goals ended. The Transparency Project was designed to make it possible for anyone to do a redundant count. And my interest was, I felt that it would make a lot more sense to actually include a redundant count with the results. So I wanted to see software that would do that redundant count. And initially, my goal was not to count every ballot. My goal was to be able to get like a 98% sample and say, all right, statistically, you're getting essentially the same percentages for all the candidates looking at this 98% of the ballots. And there's 2% of them that I'm a little uncertain about. But you know, if you've looked at 98% and come out with exactly the same percentages, and you have 2% at random that are not immediately countable, you don't need to worry too much. Now, as things have gone on, I've tried to narrow that 2% down, and it's become fairly clear to me that you can get that 2% essentially to 0%. So eventually, it'll probably be able to do everything. Okay. one of our guiding principles is that simple is best. Okay? We don't want magic. We don't want reliance on experts. With all respect to the brains here, to the computer scientists who know far more about these subjects than I do, I'm a little concerned that their goal is to develop voting systems that computer scientists can tell the world are reporting votes accurately, and that's not what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in, I think Carolyn mentioned it earlier, what I'm interested in is a system where anyone can go and figure out, yeah, it's doing this, and this, and this, and this. I can look at this intermediate result, and this one, and this one, and this one. So I myself can understand the results, and I can trust it based on my own thinking, not based on a statistician or a computer scientist telling me that some very respectable algorithm has been used. So it's not enough, in my opinion, to just report results. Even if you're right, people want to know how the results were obtained. And let me divert for just a second here. One of the interesting things about this project, and by the way, Kevin Collins is in the house.
And Becky is wife.
So one of the interesting things about this project is you don't have to believe that there's fraud taking place to be interested in this project. All you have to believe is that people are imperfect and that there might be errors. So for that reason, I think it can involve a lot more people than just those who are anxious to prove perhaps that fraud is taking place. It's enough to be worried that the results that you're getting are not transparent enough that you can be sure they're correct. Okay, let's move on. So in November of 2008, we did our second run. We had done sort of a dry run at the primary in 2008. And in November of 2008, we did our first real run. And I became involved in this, not anticipating fraud, not anticipating error. I became involved in this because I was really opposed to the ATM-style voting that leaves you with no paper trail. And I kept hearing people talking about how these other systems, optical scan systems, leave you with a voter-verifiable paper audit trail. Actually, they leave you the ballots themselves, and you can count them. And so I thought, well, won't that be a better argument if somebody actually counts the ballots a second time? And so I became involved in this not because I expected a problem with our optical scan ballots. I was very confident there wouldn't be any. And I think Carolyn was as well. Yeah. I became involved in this because I wanted to move people towards optical scan and away from the ATM style. Well, what happened is we found out that they couldn't even do optical scan right. The vendors had produced systems that simply didn't work. And what happened ended up being investigated by the Secretary of State. And what they found was, it's now called the DEC 0 error. First of all, we did our own independent count. And before we even counted votes, we were just counting the number of ballots we'd scanned. And when we did that, we came up with 200 more than were reported in the official results. And we were convinced we did something wrong.
Yes.
We were totally convinced that we had scanned things twice or something. And then it turns out that Diebold has a bug in their system called the DEC 0 error. And Carolyn can explain this probably far better than I, but I'll give you the brief version. Okay? When you're scanning stuff into the system, the official system, it's not uncommon to run into a situation where there's been a double feed or something didn't read properly. And the way in which the official system handles that is you clear that out. It's called a DEC. You clear that DEC out and you rerun them from the beginning of the DEC.
Let me just jump in here.
Yeah.
That is the situation with the Diebold, which, by the way, in November 2008 had already changed its name to Premier Election Systems. I think everybody here probably knows that. That is the method with the GEMS software of Diebold/Premier. That is not common to other systems.
Other better systems.
Yeah, yeah,
Really?
yeah. It's a recommended practice. Well, let me say that also that we sort much more extensively than, and I'm talking primarily about vote by mail ballots. We sort much more extensively than most counties do. Every precinct ballot is sorted, every vote by mail ballot is sorted down to the precinct level, where others just do them in batches. And perhaps Tom could agree or disagree on that. I don't know. What's the practice in YOLO? Do you?
We do sort by precinct, but
Okay.
we do multiple rounds of sorting, so the batches get smaller, but they're still sorted by precinct.
Yeah, okay. Okay. But we not only sorted down to the precinct level, but we also counted how many ballots are in this stack, how many can I expect to feed through this machine, which is, I think, above and beyond. Before we fed those ballots into the optical scan device. So if the number that we came up with didn't match the number in the deck that had just been scanned on the AccuVote system, we would first recount, because just like Mitch said, we were sure we made a mistake, not the machine. We would recount those batches first to verify the number in them, and then if it didn't match, something got double fed somewhere or something was wrong, we would delete that batch and run it again as a new batch. So that deleted batch wouldn't show up in the final count.
So here's what Diebold provided. What Diebold provided was a system where the first time you delete a batch, it deletes the batch, which is what you want, and it also deletes the first batch that you scanned.
But not immediately. Not immediately. You don't know when that's going to happen.
Right.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
So the workaround of it was in a pretty casual memo that I learned of after it became public that somehow 200 ballots had fallen off the face of the earth after they were scanned as Deck 0. They were scanned. We had the tape that said they were scanned. We had results from election night in which they were included. And it was several scans later when we deleted a batch that Deck 0 went away too. And their casual little memo said, not telling you that that's what would happen. They just indicated that it would be a good practice to, after you fire up the system and run your 0 reports, go ahead and run a deck and delete it. It'll help you count because the counting starts with 0, and this way if you just run that batch, even if it's just 2 or 3 ballots, just run that batch and delete it, and now run your real batch. It'll be starting with 1, it'll be easier to count.
So this was a one-time memo. This was a one-time email memo that went out to registrars. The Secretary of State of California had conducted a top-to-bottom review of all election equipment used in the state, but Diebold didn't think it was worth providing that memo to the Secretary of State of California, and it was news to them. And it was also news to them, as they began looking into the Diebold system again, that it could drop audit logs. The audit logs had inaccurate information. There was actually a button in the user interface of the system that allowed you to delete one of the audit logs. And you don't have to be an accountant to know that you don't want your audit log to be deleted. That's the backstop that everybody in these companies had been saying you could rely on. Well, you might not have this information, but there's an audit log backing everything up, so you can always tell whether it's being done properly. Well, there was a button in the user interface to delete it. Not only was there a button to delete it, but you know how when you try to save something in Microsoft Word, or when you try to exit Microsoft Word with an unsaved document, it'll say, "Are you sure?" Well, there was no dialogue like that. There was no "Are you sure?" So it was theoretically possible for somebody to accidentally delete an audit log, and you might think that would never happen. Well, it happened. It was known to the Secretary of State. They were able to find that it actually had happened. So what did we find? We found a system where the very first deck of ballots might disappear at some uncertain time, where the audit log that's supposed to be your absolute backup has inaccurate information, and where the audit log can be deleted, whether inadvertently or advertently. So I said I came into this without any belief that there was fraud going on, and I'm still not sure. I mean, I'm agnostic on that because I don't think that's the particularly important question. I want to make it so that if there is fraud going on, it's impossible, and if there isn't fraud going on, then errors can get caught. I think the same system can give you both results. But imagine this for a second. Diebold had a system where they had sent out a memo to the registrars of voters around the state telling them that the first deck of ballots could go away. So if you scan stuff into that first deck of ballots and then at some later point delete a deck of ballots, first deck's gone. Think about if you wanted to commit fraud. Well, you put them in the first deck. There's no restriction on the size of the first deck. And then if you're concerned about the audit log, there's a button in the user interface that lets you delete the audit log. So my honest opinion is that it probably never got used fraudulently. I mean, that's my opinion. I'm sure other people will disagree. But, boy, is that best practices? Probably not. So let's pick up again before I get all hyped. So let's see. What's our system? We scan the ballots, assigning them numbers and printing the numbers on them as they go into the scanner. We go through a process called digital signing to make sure that somebody who downloads the collection, if they're getting it off the internet, can ensure that it really originated with us and that it hasn't been changed since being originated. So I said earlier we want to spot check the saved images against the actual paper documents, just to make sure that the scanner hasn't played a trick. And that was the point at which the Transparency Project says we've done our job. We have now made these ballots available to anyone else who wants to count them. And then the software that I developed just goes on to do these things. It goes ahead and looks at each ballot, and it determines where the vote opportunities are. And what it does is it says how dark are they, or how light are they. And if it's very dark, it's a vote. If it's not very dark, it's not a vote. If it's sort of intermediate, it might be a vote. And it's as simple as that. And then we provide the ballot-by-ballot results. November 2010 vote op histograms. Okay. For someone who is, let me just give you a quick idea of what a histogram is. Imagine that you have a bunch of votes. You've cut all the vote opportunities off of ballots and put them on index cards. And you're going to say, the darkest cards I'm going to put in a pile over here. And then the next darkest I'm going to put in a pile over here. And lighter than that in a pile over here, and so on. And then let's look at the height of those piles. And that'll tell us how many really dark ballots we have, how many really light ballots we have, and so on. So what this histogram, that's exactly what this histogram is. Imagine that this is representing the height of stacks of cards. So here are vote opportunities that on a scale of really 0 to 255, with 0 being black and 255 being bright white, we end up with a whole bunch of cards in this area here, and then it dwindles to nearly 0 cards in this area here, and then there's a really large amount of cards here, a huge stack of cards. Well, these here between 145 and 165 on this particular one represent all of the non-voted vote opportunities. They're not all the way bright because they still have a box drawn around them on our system. It draws a heavy black box. So on a scale of 0 to 255, with 255 being white, we get a whole bunch of non-voted vote opportunities. And they're tight because one non-voted vote opportunity looks a lot like any other. So they all peak around the same intensity. Down here we have the votes. And they're spread out because some people make a heavy mark, some people make a light mark. But what's useful to see is this goes nearly to 0 before we get to the non-votes. And so if you're looking to do 98% of the ballots or 99% of the ballots, really it suffices to just look at the intensity and say, if it's beneath this point, it must be a vote. If it's above this point, it must be a non-vote. That's as technical as I'm going to get now. So that's over with. Fear not. But the point of that is that the separation between votes and non-votes is pretty clear, and you don't have to be terribly sophisticated to figure out which is which. So the vote counting system, I initially developed it just for Diebold, and I've been trying to extend it so that it will work on a variety of ballot types. And one of the reasons that this sort of thing can be developed relatively quickly by a very small team of one is that it's really just a matter of gluing together software that already exists. And the open source software community is really remarkable. I mean, it's giving away things, and in America, sometimes you think when people are giving things away, it can't be worth anything. But actually, a lot of open source programs are of higher quality than equivalent commercial programs. Well, here are things that go into the verification. The operating system is called Linux. It's free. The ability to sign a document so that you can prove it came from you and has not been altered is free. It's something called GPG. The scanning protocol is free. MNOA something. I still can't remember his last name. It'll come to me before the end of the evening. Tesseract is an optical character recognition program that was developed by Hewlett-Packard Labs. And somebody probably decided a number of years ago they weren't going to make any money with it. They open sourced it, and so it's available for free. The computer language Python is available for free. It comes with an image processing library, PIL, which is free. There are free spreadsheets and so on, free databases, and so they all exist. And so I went and grabbed them all, and I decided I would humbly call it TEBS, the Trachtenberg Election Verification System. Basically, it's grabbing what other people have done and just gluing it all together. So it adds a little bit of ballot processing, but basically it's glue, connecting this pre-existing free software, and it continues to be free. And so let me show you what the interesting part of it looks like. You know, watching the scanning of ballots, you know, you just put them in a scanner and there's not much to say. And then extracting the data, you just see it saying, yeah, I extracted data. So there's not much to say about that. But I can show you what it looks like to actually look at the ballots. So once it has gone through and analyzed a ballot, it will go ahead and present an overlay. What you see in green here is its opinion of where the vote opportunities are. And what you see in blue are the characters that were read by optical character recognition software off of the area by the vote opportunity. So that allows you to associate each vote opportunity with a contest and candidate. And if it's dark enough, then it's made red. And so there are a lot of ways that this could be used. But one use opportunity would be to have this software running while stuff is being scanned. And it just needs to run a few documents behind what's being scanned. And you can set this to just automatically advance. And I'm going to enlarge this. And I'm going to change it to advance once every 2 seconds or every 3 seconds. So you could imagine an auditorium. And there could be one person from each candidate that had been running, one person from each candidate's team. And they could just be watching this, and they could say, yep, I agree with the software on that one. I agree with the software on this one. And then the software might make a mistake. And when it does, they can say stop. And this can be stopped. We can check that mistake. Or they could just note it for themselves, because the number of the ballot image is right up in the corner. So that would be one way that you could use it. And basically what it's doing is computer automating a hand count. And it can count all races in parallel because you can have people looking at one race, other people looking at another race, other people looking at another race. So what exists now is we use optical character recognition to build what are called ballot templates or ballot definition files from the actual images. We can automate the counting of about 98% or 99% of the votes, and we can tell you which ones need to be hand counted. We can show the ballots overlaid with the votes as determined by the software, report ballots and votes that need a manual count, and we can capture, just as another service, this really has nothing to do with anything else, we can capture the write-in images and give you mosaics of all of the write-ins. I wanted to show you one other thing here. I'm going to go into, I promised you I wouldn't be too much of a geek. I'm going to be a geek for just a bit more and show you the directories that are built. What happens, I'm going to go into just the first 1,000 and let's look at this. I'll enlarge it. What this is actually what you were seeing a moment ago in a much prettier form. What you were seeing before were the ballots with overlays of the candidate names and so on, and green boxes around the vote opportunities. And this is where all that came from. So we generate something like this for each line of each ballot. Here it's in the image file 1.jpg, which has this sort of a barcode on it. And we're looking at the governor race. We're looking at Shalane Nightingale. And these are the coordinates at which that green box will appear. This is the intensity, the average intensity that we found. And then there's a whole bunch of other information that's used to determine whether or not something should be blue or red. And so all of this information can just be loaded into a spreadsheet. And it's also already loaded into a database. So if you want to find out how many votes there were for a particular person, you can just do what's called querying the database and say, well, how many votes were there for Shalane Nightingale? And because you have all that information, in addition to being able to just get vote counts, you can find the dubious ones, the ones that you're not sure exactly what's going on. So I'm going to run the program again, and I believe it was 7207. 7207 is an example of a ballot that is called ambiguous by the program. And sure enough, even though the person is supposed to completely fill in the voting area, enlarge it a bit, you know, it's probably an old person that has real trouble writing. And so they did vote for Allison Jackson, but it's not very dark. So you can get down to this level of detail if you want to, and that's all available to you. Okay. In terms of where we'd like to go from here, you can probably imagine all sorts of ways that you could improve on this. And, you know, perhaps being able to annotate the ballots with responses, or being able to ask the program to show you in sequence all of the ambiguous ballots, or, you know, pretty much anything anybody could think of would be an improvement. And we can add that because it's open source. So it's not a matter of going to a particular vendor and begging them to do something that will then cost them $500,000 or $1 million to recertify. It's just a matter of sitting down, looking at the code, and adding what you need to add. Or if you don't feel comfortable doing that yourself, finding a Python programmer and asking them to add that. And that's part of the beauty of open source, and that's why it evolves so much more fast than commercial software. So, how are we doing on time? Should I?
Well, we should wind it
Yeah.
up to give, because we
Yeah.
have people who have been handed question cards. and
Okay,
I'd
okay.
like to
Then,
have
in
those
fact-
rounded up and then brought here so I can read them off.
Okay. Then I'll just take 1 minute and explain that there are a number of issues and concerns with this approach, and I'd be glad to discuss them with people in the future. I'll just mention them here because I think people should be aware that there are legitimate concerns, and we have what we feel are legitimate responses to those concerns. So you do hear that this making of ballot images available on the internet can conceivably lead to vote buying and coercion, and we can respond to that should it come up. There are legal questions about whether or not you're allowed to print identifying numbers on ballots, and if that turns out to be a problem, then it's real easy to rearrange things so that you don't need to. There are concerns about the cost. People should look into what election administration actually costs, what it costs to print ballots and so on. This sort of thing can be extremely inexpensive compared to almost anything else that goes on in elections. And what if the second count is wrong? And I'll just respond to that one first. Basically, it's the wrong question. If the second count is wrong, then you'll discover that because you have all of the information I was just showing you, and you'll be able to find out which ballot was wrong. And if that happens a whole lot, then people are probably going to stop using the software for a second count. But that's not the important question. The important question is, what if the first count is wrong? Right now, in all but 2 jurisdictions, Yolo County with Tom Stenionis and Freddie Oakley, and Humboldt County with Carolyn Cernich, except for those jurisdictions, if the first count is wrong, there's nothing to say that it was wrong. In these 2 jurisdictions, and hopefully soon in many more, you can catch the problems. And you can catch the problems if they were because of fraud. You can catch the problems if they were because of errors on the part of the election administrator. And you can catch the problems if they're because of errors in the machines that were provided by the commercial vendors. So that's our goal, and I'm done. Thanks.